I am going to ask as we get started that if you need to head out during class, or if you see anyone cutting through, they have to get not to go that way through the front foyer, but head out through the kitchen, so we don't interrupt the class that's being held there. So in the spirit of a message focused on truth, I'm going to be very honest with you up front. This message or this lesson is for you to teach, not me. Let me mute this. As I prepared the sermon this week, I intentionally prepared a message that would be less heavy on the instructor for afterwards to be involved, but it relies heavily on you all being involved and giving opinions. And I tested this microphone. It seemed to be working working without squealing and yelling at us. So take God to work day. And who do we work for? The entire lesson today is revolving around one simple scripture. I had to sit down and go, well, what's this week's lesson going to be about? What we do to become better Christians and improve. So I just picked one that is probably my worst one for improvement. There we go. So we'll start with a raising of hands. How many of us have read Colossians 3:23 before? Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, but not human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So how many of us have read this scripture before? Or should I say, how many of us, this is the first time hearing this scripture, that you're supposed to work like the work isn't for a person, but for God? Still no? Have you never heard it before? Hands up. I have heard it before. I've heard it a lot. So the first question that's being posed to us is, in the workplace, is this what we see from our Christian employees, from ourselves as Christians? But specifically, this is geared towards Christians. Do we see this in the workplace? Are Christians working in the workplace as if these were individuals working for God himself? So that's to you, because I don't want to say what I have to say.
It's a mixed bag, Brother Jason. Some yes, some absolutely no. And I guess it's also a mixed bag for me as well if I examine myself. On some days, yes, and some days, absolutely no.
Absolutely no. That's a strong one. Yeah. Who else? Individuals you know are Christians at your workplace or yourself. Are you working as if you're working for God?
I have been blessed with, I'm thinking of one exceptional employee who was working for God all the time. He was studying the scriptures. Very, very, very focused on working for God. An exceptional employee. And I just wanted to share that. So I don't know if that works. Is that all right? Is that a Christian employee?
So was he studying the scriptures when his employer was paying him to like file paperwork?
Well, he was employed to work for us. And he spent the time, preparing.
Good point. So do we think that's what Colossians 2:23 means? I'm sorry, 3:23. Do we think it means that instead of working, or the work that we're hired to do, that means we are reading the Bible, praying, studying? Is that what that means when it says do those things like we're working for God? We can do a exaggerated head shake, yes or no, for that answer if you'd like. Is that what is that what Colossians means? I got a couple real exaggerated means like so what does it mean then? If it doesn't mean that, what does it mean? He trusts that you have insight, sister.
No, that's not what it means. From what I gather, it means that whatever you're doing, whatever you're asked to do, your focus should not be on just pleasing your employer, but your focus to ensure that God is pleased with what you are doing. So even if you have a terrible supervisor, it means that you should respect the supervisor and do your work, get to work early, come back from lunch early and things like that, and give up your best.
I like that because you incorporated, I think, more than just action, but attitude. There's an attitude component of that. Would you be in a bad mood if you were working for God? If God's like, hey, I need you to do this, would you, throw your hands up? So attitude is part of it. I like that. How else do we see this manifest? How many here, we'll do a show of hands for this one. How many here have ever worked with someone or been somewhere? Maybe they didn't work with you. You were just in an office because you had business there. And you saw someone and wow, they were just a really strong Christian. And you know that because everything on their desk lets you know that they were a strong Christian. They had all the Bible verses up. They have little figurines of crosses and scriptures, and their coffee mug says that they're a Christian, and their whole cubicle or desk is just plastered with all this Christian paraphernalia to let you know that they're a Christian, but they treated you just worse, the worst, or like you were a bother, or not like a Christian who was there working for God. Have we ever run into that? Has that ever happened? Am I the only one? I had an individual, she worked in DC. Don't even remember why I had to go to her office. It was for some sort of paperwork. And she had the paraphernalia everywhere. The Christian calendar, the Christian coffee mug, the Christian scriptures everywhere, even the rest for your arm where you type, like, was Christian. Like, I don't even know where you find stuff, Christian labeled stuff like that. What a mean lady. She was so mean. She was in a worse attitude. She wouldn't even look me in the eyes. She was just so disgruntled. And I thought to myself, like, wow, you might want to put the Christian paraphernalia away, because it would be better for me to come and just assume you're a mean person than for you to plaster the fact that what you should be is someone who knows God and in fact does not want to be here or be bothered with other people. So now looking inward, how do we feel about our performance at work? Like I said, I did this one because it's probably one of my biggest struggles. if we're told you need to file this, or I need you to write this up, or I need you to go here and do that, are we doing those things like God asked us to do those things? Because to your point, if God asked me to take out the trash, I probably shouldn't sit down and read scripture, right? Like, I should take out the trash. So what do we think about our own Christian representation in work? Are we fulfilling Colossians?
Okay, good morning. Well, this topic touched me very deep. I'm a medical doctor. And well, as you know, I'm not from Jamaica. And since I came to Jamaica, I was working at the medical field. Especially, I was working at the public sector. And I remember when I was working at Corona Regional Hospital, every day when I went there in the morning at 7 o'clock, all the nurses start doing, well, they were singing, clapping, everything for God, this and that. But there were a point where I needed to tell them, why you sing in the morning if you don't take care of your patients? What are you doing if you don't bring love to the patients? The patient is calling you because they need attention, and you say, I cannot pay attention to you now. And then I was telling them, where is God? Maybe they were hating me for that, but I didn't have other reason, other option. That is something that I deal with almost every day, because sometimes, as you say, we show something, but we are not demonstrating that we are feeling what we are showing. And then it's something difficult. If other person that is not Christian is seeing you in that attitude, it's difficult for that person to believe what you say you believe.
Yeah, there's a repercussion for our behavior as Christians that I would argue the non-Christians don't have necessarily. You're standing up and taking a stance by saying, I am this way, and I represent certain things. And then when you don't live up to them, it affects those around you about how they view about what you say you stand for. And it is detrimental. And it's definitely something I struggle with myself, because I get to work and I'm just like, done. Before I start, I'm done. And it's why, the why. I'll do this one. So what are the things, now if you're one of those people who goes to work every day like you're working for God, I'm jealous of you, because I do know Christians like that. I may work in the embassy with a Christian like that. I may drive with her to the embassy every day and drive home with her every day afterwards. I do know a few people who it's amazing how they work like they're working for God. But if you're not there, or if you have days where you're not there, what do you think keeps you from working at work like you're working for God? Because this is probably me right around 1300 every day. I shut my door for maybe 15 minutes because I just need a few seconds, but
LaCount, are we assuming here that we're working for God like we're working for God? Is that an assumption that we're making, and is it a fair assumption? Based on your sermon today, are we indeed working for God like we should be? And shouldn't that be the start before we go to that question?
okay, let's do it.
I have a question, right? What about if you, well, with what Brother David just said, we don't necessarily know right now if we're actually working for God as we should, right? But what about if you're striving to work for God, but because you're doing that, you end up being taken advantage of because, well, in my experience or the days when I give my all and I give my best, in some cases, you just end up getting stuff that you weren't responsible for, extra things to do that have nothing to do with what you were supposed to be doing. So it's almost like you're getting punished for being a good employee. So how do you cope with that then?
Good question. Do we have someone who wants to answer that? Just answer her own question. Is that what
Oh, my question is, you're striving to work for God, right? But then as a result, it's almost like you're being punished by your employer for being such a marvelous employee because they're now taking advantage of you.
So you are trying to work at work like you're working for God, and the reward for good work is more work. So you keep on getting more and more work on top of the work. And so you feel like you've been taken advantage of.
I think when that happens, at the end of the day, you cannot do more than what you can do. And if everything that you supposed to do, you do it with love. You put all your effort, you do your best. At the end of the day, you will have, how can I say, ¿cómo se recompensa? A reward. And not from the males, not from the man, it's from God. I think like that.
I think sometimes it's difficult. I remember while I was teaching, you have X number of sessions every day and like 30, 40 students. And I usually teach at the higher level. They have exams. And what the requirement is that you have every 6 weeks, you have to give a test. And it has to go to the principal. You have to give homework. And if you have, say, 5 sets of students, that's about 5 times 35, and you have them for class every week, then you have to do a lesson plan, a detailed lesson plan. And after each class, you have to assess yourself, assess the students. And this lesson plan you have to give to the head of department. Well, I told them that my blood pressure is not going to go up. That means that you have to take homework. And as you get to school in the morning, you have to start. You don't have any breather time. In addition, you're in charge of a year group. So I usually tell my head of department, I plan my lessons, not in the detailed way, what this prescribed format that you want, because I don't have the time to accomplish all of that. And I tell her, I said, write me up. You can tell the principal, write me down that my lesson plans are not in the format, but you cannot say I don't plan my lessons. I think sometimes we allow persons to take, as in Jamaica, we say advantage of us because we don't articulate and we just allow persons to pile things on. And we find that we get stressed, not being able to cope. You have to take home things. And the more we take home and do is the more they add to it because we don't say anything.
Thank you. Yeah. You need to sometimes be an advocate, and we'll let the brother speak and then I'll have some for that.
I'm in agreement with what Sister Grinnell said in light of what Akila had asked. I remember when I was about Nathaniel's age, there was a young man that my father employed that used to do yard work. And he pretty much my mother would provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner for him. And when me and my sister didn't want any dinner, we constantly just dump the food in his plate, and he would always take it in. Probably they would lie a couple of times. He obviously never want any more food. But we just dump the food in his plate, dump the food, because he always says yes. And I think when Sister Grinnell was talking and the question that Akila had asked, it just came to mind because it was so many decades ago, but at the same time, the message resonated with me that people will take advantage of you. And then the question that David had asked is, if for argument's sake, I have boundaries, then is it a case that I'm not acting as if I'm working for God? In terms of what does working for God mean? Does that mean that I can't have boundaries? Everybody can just dump everything on my plate. If we're not talking about me performing in a particular manner, that I realize, okay, fine, you're going to get more responsibilities, you're no supervisor, there's a progression in terms of your career path, that's a different thing. But I think it's a separate issue now when now people are taking advantage of you and neglecting their own job and expect you to do it. I'm not sure whether or not that is working for God if I'm encouraging that slackness.
So I want to bring up, I think I was listing them off in my head. I realized it was more than I thought. We'll do Phineas, Gideon, Moses, and even Mary. All of those are individuals who negotiated with God. So in that same context, you're not deviating from the way God deals with us if you're negotiating with your employer for something different. Gideon wanted God to prove, I need the fleece to be moist this day, and it's going to be, so he negotiated with God. Like, I'm not just going to go out and do this. I need reassurance from you first. Phineas, which is my favorite story. So Phineas throws a spear through two sinners in the camp, and God stops the plague. He ultimately goes, what if I do this instead? If I do this one big act, will that take care of things? And it did. We see Moses saying, I'm not a good speaker. And he's like, well, we'll work with, we can have Aaron do it. And you see Mary coming to Jesus to turn water into wine. And his response was, no, it's not time for me to do that yet. And as a good Jewish mother, she just turned around and said, he'll do it. And she walked away. And then he did it. And these are all times where people negotiated with God. You also have Abraham, right, negotiating for Sodom and Gomorrah, the destruction. God is not someone who you cannot negotiate with. Ergo, you shouldn't approach your boss like he's not someone you can't negotiate with, because he's not above God. So I would argue that if the workload is becoming too much, you are not deviating from working for God if you're talking to your employer and saying, that's really too much for me. I can't do that. We need to adjust this to something that I can do. Or I can make it this far, but I'm, or what if I do this instead? Will that satisfy it? Because those are all examples that God has given us that he's okay with. So our bosses should be okay with it too. And then in that case, we don't have to worry about, or we can mitigate people taking advantage of us. Because it happens I've seen it in my own personal experience, two reasons. They will do it because that is their intent. They absolutely desire to push work off on someone else and make them do it. And then other times they might do it unknowingly, where they're just don't realize, like, well, they're just such a strong worker. I thought I could give them more, and they keep doing it. Everything's great that they do. So I thought this was my star person that I can just pile stuff on, and they'll find a way, and then get to a point where they're like, oh, maybe I've gone too far. So,
just two quick things. In the examples that you gave a while ago about LaCount, was God always pleased with the fact that the negotiation was going on? As a side point.
yes and no, right? Depending on the instance. Yeah.
So we need to, maybe that was a second best option. But then the other thing I wanted to say in response to Akila is that there needs to be balance. So yes, we must go negotiate, we must stand up for our rights, but there's nothing, I think it is more annoying than an employee who knows their job description like the back of their hand, and you can never ask them to put a dot in addition to that job description. I don't think that exhibits a Christian attitude. And so there needs to be a balance as well.
Oh, that's a great example. Yeah.
Right, I was going down that line. Based on your truth, what is truth? Is this too much? Am I being taken advantage of? From what perspective? I think if we think of ourselves as parents, when we have the little ones who say, I can't do anymore. I can't do my homework now. Is it really too much or not? And so, yeah, there's always going to be some balance, but yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong in speaking to your employer and, to discuss whatever it is. But at the end of the day, yeah, we don't know that your sense of what ought to be done or where your limits are, whether that is always acceptable. All right. The real point I want to ask as well, though, is going back to the talents and the parable of the talents. Does working as for God mean that you really have to maximize your talent? So when I am, I have tasks to do and I kind of do them all right-ish, but not to the best of my ability, am I working for God then? In terms of the parable of the talent, where you must really, my understanding is that you must put your talents, maximize the value, the use of your talents. If I'm doing less than I am capable of, am I working for God? That's a question.
So one other thing to throw in before I come across is when Jesus says that we should go the extra mile and turn the other cheek and the cloak, does this fit in anywhere here at all?
Yes, I would say yes, there's components of it that would, in my mind. I mean, those were all, I don't know if I had this discussion before, those all have a legal component for what, when that expression was being said, those were actually examples of all legal things of pushing people beyond what they're legally allowed to request of you and showing them that you're willing to do more, which has some connection, I would argue, to it. But then there's also a sort of distinction about the fact that these were specific legal things. So yeah, but yes, short answer, I would say yes.
Well, I'm agree with everything that we discussed here. Sometimes we speak based on our experience. Sometimes we can be misunderstood, no? But why I say what I said before is not related. Of course, if we have too much work, we need to try to organize that, because at the end of the day, you cannot do your work properly. Okay, I'm agreeing with all that was said here. For example, in my experience, working in the medical field, things are difficult, especially if you have feeling and if you like what you are doing. Sometimes when I was at work, for example, there were 100 patients. And when each doctor saw like 10 patients, they say, I'm not going to see anymore. I'm tired. I'm overwhelmed, this and that. But I continue seeing the patients, because I always said, how I'm going to send a patient sick home without seeing them? Even when I'm tired, even when the time gone, it's not my work time. I didn't see before, like for doctors, it's very easy to just stand up and go and leave the patient there. But I cannot do it. I cannot do it. This is and I know, like me, for example, my wife, she cannot do that. And when she was at the hospital recently, she got very sick because of the stress and those. But we cannot leave the patient sometimes dying and just leave. That's why I speak like that, no? Everybody has their experience and the way to work and all of that, no? But in these aspects, it's something I think deep for me. It's my experience, the way that I take it, okay?
No, thank you. And I think the example you're giving there, because when you asked the question originally, that's why I went back a slide. The scripture kind of gives us the answer to a point. And that is, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. So part of this component is the reward isn't just coming from your employer. It's not just about what you're getting from your work. when you engage in work like this, the scriptures are telling us that you're earning rewards from God, which it doesn't necessitate that your boss ever acknowledge your hard work. It doesn't necessitate that your boss ever go, you know what, I really piled all that work on you, but you manage it. You're so great. You did a great job. Here's a raise. That doesn't have to happen because the scriptures are letting us know you're earning for God at that point. And I would much rather arrive at the last day in front of God and him go, what you did, I saw that. What you did at work, I saw that. I know why you were doing it. And have him tell me what a good and faithful servant I am than have a person do it. But it doesn't mean that we don't have the opportunity to negotiate our work to ensure that we're doing what we can with our employers, and also making sure we're examining and not short selling ourselves, because you may have a boss who has more faith in you than you do. So that's why they're piling stuff onto you, because they want you to experience the reality of what you can truly achieve. I would say that my mother was someone who was like that. She still works there. She has worked at the same company, over 30 years now. So she started as a secretary, and one of her supervisors was leaving, and she told her, I'm not leaving this company. I think she was retiring. She's like, I refuse to leave this company and you're still a secretary. And she forced her into a supervisor position somewhere, doing other things, to the point where a couple months ago, the CEO, the newly appointed CEO of that company, wanted her to be, I don't know what the position name is, basically second in command behind the CEO. She started as a secretary, but she was actually being pushed through the system because she had supervisors who believed that she was capable of more when she did not. And they forced that upon her. And she was like, it's too much work. I can't manage that. I don't know how we'll be able to do that. But they said, you can and you will. And they put her in that position, and she did. So sometimes, we know who we work for. We learn their personalities. We can probably gauge better than a hypothetical scenario. But all of those things come into play when we're talking about working for God, because sometimes God's doing the same thing. He's putting more on us because he knows we're capable of it.
A similar example, Brother Jason, but it works even when the supervisors and the employees do not have your best interest at heart. But God, there's a passage that somewhere in Proverbs that says, man's hearts are like streams in the hands of God, and he turns them whichever way he wishes. I had a boss who gave me every type of job, every committee to head, everything to do. And it was unfair. And I would complain, not to him, but to others, but it still got piled on, and I did it. I almost died doing it, but I did it. And I couldn't understand why. But later on down, when I eventually got to the position that I was previously in, I realized that there was no aspect of the work that I didn't understand, because I had headed all of those different committees. And so because of that, him being unfair to me, I believe it was God preparing me to be able to have a better understanding of another job that he knew I would have gotten later on down in time. So sometimes we look at things as people being unfair to us, but as long as we can learn from it, we never know how God is going to work it out for us later on down to our benefit.
And so for the next question, I think that sounds like one of the first answers we have is what are the things that keep us from working for God? And maybe one of those things is the fear that we're going to be taken advantage of. Because we know our employer is not God, and he's not going to treat us like God would treat us, because we don't have to worry about God being fair. We trust and love God to do the right thing. So maybe one of those first reasons is because we're afraid that we'll be taken advantage of and our work won't be appreciated. Which I would argue are two separate things. You can be afraid you'll be taken advantage of, and you can also afraid your work will not be appreciated, so you don't. What other things do you think, mindsets or way we approach work, that cause us to hesitate or to pull back from going like, this is a work for God that I'm doing? Distraction. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, if you work on a computer all day, there's a lot to distract you there. Or I don't have it playing anymore in my office. We used to have the news playing on a TV in the office. That's hard. That's a distraction because I'll be in my office and I'll hear the TV say something, will lean to what my message was about today. And then I just have to get up and go, so like, what are they talking about? What did they just say? What did I hear come out of their mouth?
Another reason could be if you're doing a job that you're not really interested in.
Yeah. Maybe a lack of passion for your career that you're in. Does everyone here know who Mike Rowe is? He's I'll say celebrity, but it's kind of weird to call him. Mike Rowe, you ever see the show Dirty Jobs? The guy who follows people who have like really kind of grimy, dirty jobs, and he's the host of it, Mike Rowe. He was talking about a guy who did septic tank cleaning, which is like not the greatest job in the world. And he just did it because it was a job. And then he worked that job for a while, but he wanted to do a good job. And then he started his own company. He does his own, and now he's got his own trucks and he does all this. And he said, I started out as a job, and then one day I found out that my passion was cleaning other people's crap. And it wasn't, and it was Mike Rowe was talking about individuals who follow their passions versus those who develop their passions by what they're doing. And I always thought that was amazing because I don't know how to be that person. I don't know how to be that person to be like, I'm in this position and I'm not passionate about it, how to develop that passion. Because some people can. It's what we in the church would say, we bloom where we're planted, right? That's a huge struggle for me. If I'm not passionate about it, it's 10 times harder to work like I'm working for God. What else keeps us from approaching our work?
But I still struggle with the question because I find sometimes that I approach my work more seriously than I approach evangelism. And I know that's a problem. And so maybe that's why I can't answer that question in that.
Do you think that's a problem, or do you think that's an area of your Christian walk that is just better developed than the other area? No, you think it's a problem. Fair, okay. So can you be a hard worker in your job, doing your job really well, but not doing it like you're doing it for God? Can you outwardly display what you would expect someone who, if I was like, yeah, they clearly look like they're working for God, but not be working for God?
I would say yes, because they're highly functional persons who, that are atheists, that has maybe a better work ethic than the typical Christian. So I would say yes. I would say that maybe it comes back to the passion situation in terms of when you're really passionate about something, then pretty much when persons are working in an area that they're passionate about, I'm not sure if you can actually are able to, I stand to be correct, if you can distinguish between them and someone who's working as if they're working for God. Because as David had mentioned, then the job description is not a barrier. I don't have an issue working overtime. I don't have an issue with blurring the lines in terms of my responsibilities. So I would say that as well. But I must say, in terms of, I understand the point that was made earlier that Akila had mentioned, that you're not passionate about it. And I guess when I heard that, the first thing I was thinking is that, okay, fine, but if you're not passionate about it, then should that be a hindrance in terms of you working as if you're working for God? You know what I'm saying?
Should it be versus is it, right? Like I would argue it shouldn't be, because it doesn't say, as long as the job is what you want to be doing. And so whatever you
yeah,
do, the scripture says
yeah.
whatever. But I understand, but that's a challenge. That's a hurdle that you have to then overcome to achieve working like you're working for God, is to compensate for the fact you're not passionate about it.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
degree's art degree.
yeah,
Um,
but I get
So it's
that
like that
because,
stuff's easy and I'm passionate about it, but the other stuff for work I'm not. So
yeah, 'cause I remember my first job, and I was actually in that same situation where I mean, your first job, you're excited for it, but after maybe the first week or the first month, you know, if you see me at 10 o'clock, you're lucky. I should be from 8:30. So I get it in terms of that passion thing, really, that it does happen.
So we have Stephen Grinnell in the chat saying, yes, I assume that. So yes, you can work like that, but not be working for God, or like you're working for God. He said, if you're committing sin, whether as a job requirement or to facilitate greater results. So I assume you're mentioning, Stephen, you're saying something to the effect like, if for your work, you're doing thing that is against God, then obviously you're not working for God. If just because your work has you do it, whether that's shady dealings or simply something that's legal, but against God. Yeah, a great example. Thank you, Stephen. Sister?
I guess my question is, and how do you, is it matter that you say as you go? Because then, you're working in a job where others are able to give 70 hours, but because of all your responsibility, you can only give, say, 45. You meet the 40-hour per week requirement, but it's not 70. And so you are shown up in that context. And then, so is God pleased with that? So your boss may not necessarily see you as a great worker because you are not giving 70 hours, but you can't because of all your other responsibilities. That's the first thing. And then second, how do you do it as you go? That's my question. All right. So if you're trying to make the 70 and that takes you away from everything else, how then, what's the balance? How you do all of it? Getting the 70 hours, meeting your boss requirement, at the same time, evangelizing for God, what do you do? That's my question.
That's a good question. Those are good questions. The easy one I would say is, luckily, we don't have to work for God in a way where our boss recognizes we're working for God. It's God knows, and that's who we're doing it for. Ergo, if our boss doesn't acknowledge it because for whatever reason, I would argue the scriptures don't command us that would it indicate that we're doing it wrong then, just because our boss, because, we've probably all worked for someone or worked with someone who is too obtuse to pay attention to what's really happening around them anyway. But the balance, I don't know. Like I said, brothers, I'm failing at this. I work for the US government. I find reasons all day long why everything they're having me do is stupid and I don't want to do it. So I don't know. How do we do that? How do we balance working for our job like we're working for God, but also acknowledging God has other responsibilities for us, because we have responsibilities to our wives and kids as husbands. We have responsibilities to our husbands and kids as wives. We're responsible to widows in the church. We have responsibility to those around us to evangelize. So we have a lot going on. So how do we find that balance? How do we ensure that we're working like we're looking for God while also fulfilling those other requirements that God has set before us?
Sometimes you have to make some hard decisions. Before I had children, I worked at an insurance company and I could work late, go very early, wasn't a problem. But then when I had children, I realized that picking them up from school early, having them at the workplace until after 5 o'clock was not just working out for me. So I decided that I need to change. So sometimes you have to make hard decisions to balance out everything. What you have to ensure too is that whatever you're asked to do, whatever you say you will do, you do it, not slapdash, so that whatever you produce, your supervisor is pleased with. And so I changed. And when I left, nobody wanted me to leave. Although I explained to them my time, and they said, okay, you can take home the work and blah, blah. But then I had to make a personal decision that, no, I need some more time. So I switched to something that I could have more time to balance the family. But I think also working for God has to do with our relationship with our co-workers. Because sometimes we might be doing what is on the job description. We perform that at a very high quality, but then our relationship with supervisors or our other co-workers is not very good.
Please go with it, then I first. My thought's not completely formed. It's there. It's basically, how do we define what a good employee is? How do we define that? Is it more than doing a good job at what you have? Is a good employee someone who maintains positive relationships with their coworkers? Is a good employee someone who is direct and upfront with their employer so that they're aware of situations? Can we group all that underneath and a definition of someone who is working like they're working for God? So can I say, I am working like I'm working for God if I can approach my employer and say, this is where I'm at, and this is where I'll need to be changing, and how can we accommodate that? Is versus just, gritting your teeth and bearing it and not talking to your employer. So as an employee, is that good to have that sort of open communication where maybe that's part of the problem is we just view hard work as just doing the job. And there's other components that make you a good employee that help manifest us being working like we're working for God. But my mind's not completely wrapped around what those things are.
Okay. Challenging question relates to our responsibilities to provide for our families. Can I be working for God at Red Stripe or Rare Neville? Beer manufacturer, rum manufacturer. Can I be working for God at a beer manufacturer? Or let us carry it further. What about Lotto? Can I work for God in those places?
So your question is examining the actual employment itself and then can you make that argument that would be pleasing to God? Ergo, could you be working for God if you worked? Because I think some answers are easy. Like some ones you could clearly show, yes, God's not pleased that you work there, and you can't work for God at certain places.
I just had a question. Is Brother Smith mentioned about the beer company? Is drinking a beer a sin? No.
Yeah, let's open up that too.
Alcohol.
Why
I'd
not?
like
Let's
to
do it
know.
all.
Or is it the overindulgence? I'd like to know.
So let's do an easy one. Let's hit the easy one first. I would argue you cannot work for God and be a stripper. Like an exotic dancer. You can't be, even if it's legal, even if it's like legitimate business. There's places where it's legal. You're not working for God. Fair. But that means that all I'm saying is that's an example that creates a line that you can have an employment that is not working for God.
But Brother Jason, suppose you are the cashier in the Go-Go Club.
See, I'm not. Okay. I'm just establishing that there is a line because we can find something on the other side. That's all I'm saying. There is a line. I'm not trying to draw the line. I'm just saying that we can clearly identify there is a line. Yes, yeah. You have to take care of your family, but then we don't have faith that God will allow us to take care of our family in a way that's not also opposed to his truth.
So my next question is, what about if working for God makes you the bad employee because you're working in an organization where you're the only person working for God? For example, work finishes at 4 o'clock or 4:30, but everybody finishes work at 2 o'clock, and you decide you're staying, and now everybody's like, oh, so you're trying to show us up? That happens.
I could understand. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So you're at a workplace and you are working for God, hence you're doing the right thing. Everybody else is doing the wrong thing. So you stay at work until 4:30, which is the prescribed time. Everybody else leaves at 2:30. So by working for God now, you become the enemy of everyone else in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah, you see, I was so shocked. I mean, my career from 18, I joined the Marine Corps at 18. I've been a Marine my entire adult life. So my experience in the workforce is unique. It's very different. Like for the first part of my adult life, being a good worker just meant I ran fast and I pulled myself above a bar and I didn't get in trouble. Like that was pretty much what I had to do. But my mind kind of sizzled one day when I was talking to someone who worked in government, and they hired this employee, and they were just processing purchase requirements. So they're just like, people would say, I need to purchase, and they have to go through the system, and they would process these requests, and they do like 15 a day, right? And the other people that worked around them did about 15 a year, type of thing. So they all got mad at her for this because why are you doing so many? You're making, and like, because it's not hard. I can do a lot a day. And they basically said, yes, but if you do that many, then it looks like they don't need as many of us to do that job. And we're trying to get them to hire more of us. They're trying to open up more positions. And this was in a country that this was working at the U.S. Embassy was a really important job opportunity for people. So they would slow down their work to justify why they needed more employees so that they could bring more of their locals into the U.S. Embassy and have a career. And my mind was like, I understand the intent, but like, you're not wrong for doing your job right. Although you can even though it's not just like you're making us look bad, they have sort of altruistic attempts that they're trying to do. We're trying to help people. I can't imagine you being wrong or not working for God because you're doing the right thing. We have to understand that we'll always be opposed as Christians. But our reward is coming from God for doing the right thing, not from our employers or even our coworkers, I guess. I don't know, that's tough because you are creating animosity and division amongst your coworkers. Maybe someone can help me out.
I think in a situation like that, you really just have to do the right thing. It goes back to what Brother Smith was saying about using your talent. So if you don't use your talent in that situation and you underperform, then that's between you and God and not between you and them. And so your primary responsibility first has to be with God. No, it's tough and you may feel left out, but as I've had to say in my workplace, I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to do a job. That might make the as you go evangelism a little bit harder, but at the end of the day, the light will be shone. And the light will be shone. When that light is shone and it shows that everybody in the room was purposely underperforming, including the Christian. It looks worse on a Christian than everybody else, irrespective of the peer pressure that you put on. And so you have to live your life as if one day the light is going to come, the light is going to be shown. That's how I would answer it. I don't know, Rowan has something to add.
You have something to add, brother? He says no. No, thank you. I appreciate that. It's tough because when we talk about working for God, we are throwing in this like sort of infinite number of variables for where we work, who we're working for, who we're working with, what kind of people are they. It will affect, I think it's based off our discussions, we can argue it will affect how we try to manifest working for God, but it has to still be possible or we wouldn't be commanded to do it.
All right, this example may or may not apply because while we're talking about whether or not you work in a beer factory or whatever, my mind goes back to Daniel. Daniel pretty much was working within a very evil society. The Babylonians had taken over his nation, changed the language. He was pretty much working for Nebuchadnezzar, who was pretty much even worse than Israel at the time as it relates to their idolatry, etc. After they left, after they were taken over and the Persians took them over, and then he was working for Darius. Same situation. But at the end of the day, he was still, he still maintained the core aspect of what it means to serve God, even so much so that when they had done the scheme to get him put in the lion's den, Darius actually was very taken on to Daniel to the extent where when he heard that Daniel was supposed to go in the lion's den, he fasted, he didn't eat the night. He didn't sleep actually, what the Bible says. And after the morning came, he said, the Bible says early in the morning, he ran to find out if Daniel was alive. And I guess that's one of the things that I think about as it relates to being a Christian in the workforce. That the fact is, you, regardless of the situation, you can actually still be an exemplary employee amid the environment. And you can be respected by persons who have no regard for the one true God because of how you operate. It's just, while you were talking, it's just something that came to mind as it relates to how Daniel was held in high esteem by those who did not acknowledge God. You know what I'm saying? I guess it's just, for what it's worth, I just wanted to point that out.
No, thank you, because that it means you're putting a great message out for who God is, if that's what you're doing.
I think it comes down to what we understand, or who we understand a Christian to be. That being a Christian is not something that you do, it's something that you are. So it's not a list of things that do this, I'm a Christian. It is who you are. So it's a being. And so if we see Christianity from that perspective, regardless of where we have to work, then we'd be confident. Our confidence comes not just from what our capability of doing the job, but our confidence would come from God. So we won't be shaken when persons don't come against us. We don't have to question who we are because we know exactly who we are. It's not a list of things as a Christian, I must do this and that. And sometimes I think this is where we get confused. So we have to do this to be a Christian, but we are not being a Christian. So our personality and all changes from situation to situation. So if I'm in this situation, this is my stance. But if I'm over that situation, then my stance might change.
So would it be fair to say, sister, that you are making the argument that if we're accurately engaging in our Christian walk, that itself will manifest an employee who fulfills. That's good. That's very good. Thank you.
Okay, so I have an experience that employing carvers, furniture carvers. We employ them initially on a daily basis, so that they would just get paid by the week. Then we decided that we would change to a piece rate. So we would pay them by the amount of pieces that they carve. And the output was amazing. You know, it's still shocking when I'm still thinking about the difference. And so I'm wondering if we were to look at our work now, if we were to think about ourselves, if we were paid by the output, you know, piece by piece, if it will make a difference, and if that is one way to measure whether, you know, we are doing our best for God, whatever, you know, way we want to look about it. Yeah. So the question is, if we were being evaluated on the basis of specific deliverables, specific pieces, or whatever it is, would there be a difference? Would we be worried about whether it is 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock? Would we be as tired or whatever? You know, that's a question.
Oh, it's a good question. It's a good example. Output. So I don't want to step on toes, but I'll use the US. I have an issue with schooling in the US because of output. If the product you produce is X and you expect more to continue to put out X product, but X product isn't living up to the needs, what kind of employee are you? How well are you doing your job if the product you produce is degrading with more resources? So if you switch that to furniture, if I'm giving you more time, better tools, and the chairs keep getting produced, they're worse and worse chairs that you can't sit in, at what time do you stop? Do you stop and judge the employees by the product that they're putting out? Which is an argument I've made with people when I talk about the current education system in the US. And it's a little convicting when you pose that question for me to think about as myself, what is the product I'm putting out as an employee, as someone who's supposed to be working for Christ? What is that product?
The quality didn't go down, by the way.
Well, no, I'm not saying that theirs did.
Right.
I'm not saying that their quality would have gone down or that it will go down if it's by the, I've just seen examples where people put out less quality product with better things and then never want to be judged by the product that they put out, how many or the quality.
Okay, to the question. When I was teaching, you had to have the 6-week test. And if your students are not getting, the pass rate was 66%. If your students were not getting that 66%, after the 6 weeks test, as a teacher, you're looked down as you're not performing. My stance usually is, I am teaching not for you to rote learn. You must understand the concepts and then you're able to apply. I usually teach for the sixth formers and the grade 10 and grade 11. Those are going to do exams. So when I get them, my 6-week test grades are usually poor. because I am not testing rote. I'm testing otherwise. And so I have my discipline in my class was good, so I would get good grades for that. But my rates were down, while other persons in the department, their grades were very high. But the surprising thing is, when it came to the external exam, my students got better grades. So you have to know who you are and what is it that you want to achieve and be convicted with it. Because if I had said to them, okay, my grades are, and I mean poor, you have grade 11 students coming to do accounts. And when I give them the first 6 weeks test, you have 1 or 2 doing the 66, and most of them is 30 and 20%. What do I do? Give them an easier test? I have to say no. And so when I go to staff meeting, Mrs. Grenell, these grades are not good. I say, I know they are not good, but they must learn to comprehend and reason. So it depends. Sometimes you have to take a licking, but it depends, and you have to know exactly what you're doing and who you are.
Okay, so I want to take what you're saying and use that to close, because if I distill what I was hearing, and hopefully I got distilled right, the homework I'd have for you, for me and everyone else who wants to participate, we need to take time and discern what the metrics we want to use are that make sense to determine if we are fulfilling what it says to do in Colossians. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to try to figure out what are the accurate metrics that accurately show me my output if I'm fulfilling that, and then test it to that, something that is appropriate for what you're doing. And that might, because that's one of the problems actually I've noticed is testing isn't necessarily the greatest way to determine learning, or how we test is the greatest, or testing at certain times and all these other things that create. So there is a complexity to understanding your output, and it's going to be different based off of your job, I would imagine. It's easy if you produce a product, you go, I produce X amount a day, can I bump that up to, so that's what the challenge would be as we close today's class, is see if you can determine a metric that makes sense for what you're doing to then measure if you're performing at a level that would please God. And if you're someone who maybe question if you are working for the wrong reason, so your metrics can be really high, but you don't think your necessarily focus is to please God, that's another issue for another day that I don't have good answers for. Looking at you, Brother David, based off of your original question, I don't know.
But that metric that you speak of, isn't it a fair day's work for a fair day's pay? In your mind, you have to determine whether you really have been fair in terms of what you give in order to earn the money that you have earned.
Say it again.
Fair day's work for a fair day's pay. At the end of the day, I need to sit down and ask myself, have I worked today to earn my salary? Have I put in a fair day's work, a fair amount of work today to earn my salary? Shouldn't that be the metric?
It can be, unless you don't think what you earned is enough to begin with.
But that's fine when you start looking for a new job.
Because I can easily say I don't get paid a lot, so I did enough for the little pay I got.
That don't work over, Jason. If you have accepted the job, you have accepted the terms of the job.
Yeah.
And so until you get a new job, which you should probably be looking for, then you work for the pay, right? But you can't accept the job and then having taken the pay now say, boy, it's not a good pay, so I'm going to cut my work. That don't work. You have signed the contract.
Yeah. Again, that probably falls into my limited experience, because to me, in the way I work, I don't have a job description. So I can literally have things which recently happened. I can have new things that now I never agreed to was now a responsibility. And that's just the nature of the beast when you're in the military. Things just happen. They can all of a sudden decide there's now a new duty. You're working 24 hours and you don't have an option. So you sign up to just be in. But fair, that's a fair point. I think that's a really good starting point. I don't know if it fits the bill for working for God, but I think it is a good starting point. Would I pay someone what I got paid to do the work I did? And I think that might be a really good point to start if you can be honest with yourself. And like I said, this was brought up because I don't have the answers for this. It's a challenge for me. It's, as you know, it's just a few slides, mostly questions for you so that we can talk about it. You gave me a lot to think about. I think a good place, if you're in that same boat as me, start that as maybe your first metric and then build on it. Build on that until you get to a point where you're confident that you're at least working in the right direction to be working to please God. So thank you everyone for participating and all your wonderful comments, and put my water over here. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the week. Don't forget that we do have a meeting for the adults as well as the building committee at different intervals now that class is over. All right, thank you.
Adults, please don't move.
Adults, please stand by. Adults. Who's leading the meeting? Who's leading the adult meeting? Test. Use this one. It's stronger than the other one.
And I need it.
All right.